Dear esteemed experts on the panel, friends and family of Family Planning Association of India, our globally connected extended family of IPPF and member associations, and all fellow enthusiasts of reproductive and sexual health and rights spread across 3 time zones today. This is Dr. Manisha Bise from the FPAI, wishing you a very good morning, a good afternoon, and a good evening, and a very warm welcome to our 6th webinar in the ongoing Spotlight series, Season 2. This series delves into critical topics within the broad range that constitutes sexual and reproductive health and rights. Today's webinar, as you all know, commemorates World Population Day. It was on this day in 1989 when the world's population crossed the 5 billion mark. We are more than 8.12 billion today and counting. Our topic on this occasion reflects upon the situation of our planet today and the complexities of living on this planet, where access to basic amenities, opportunities, and agency has never been equal for all human beings. Welcome again to this webinar on climate change, population, and SRHR. Amit is an experienced global leader in the energy and utilities sector.
Well, what is climate change? That is the common question that we start from. So if I can divide that subject into 3 components. The first is just introducing the concept. The second would be about explaining the drivers of climate change. And lastly, I'll end with explaining the impacts of climate change, and hopefully that will create the segue into the discussion that is related to SRHR and women's well-being in general. The Earth has been in existence for about 5 billion years, and it has certainly seen its variance in climate over this period of time. But that is not the climate change we are talking about. What we are talking about is human-centric climate change, or more specifically, the climate change as a result of activities starting from essentially the Industrial Revolution about 150 to 200 years back. And when you burn these fuels, you emit something called carbon dioxide, or CO2. This carbon dioxide is what is called as a greenhouse gas. And what does that mean? The greenhouse effect is something that allows the trapping of the sun's heat. There are multiple greenhouse gases there, and all of these gases combined increase the ability of the Earth to absorb heat. And that is what is leading to a progressive increase in temperature. That's what they are talking about. Or when they caution you against not allowing the global increase to go more than 2 degrees Celsius. So this is essentially what they are talking about, is the capacity of greenhouse gases to retain the sun's heat. You already start seeing the hottest days of the year become far, far hotter. You find the coldest days of the year becoming far colder. So the cold spells last longer, the heat waves last longer, and they become more pernicious. You start seeing increasingly more frequent hurricanes. You start seeing more forest fires. You start seeing more severe droughts. You start seeing far more destructive floods. And this is what causes a lot of impact to the human population, because we can deal with gradual shifts, but what the human species is not designed to cope with is all of these higher levels of variation and the higher levels of uncertainty that accompanies that variation. And that is why climate change becomes far more dangerous. And we're already seeing this even when the average temperature rise is about 1.4 degrees Celsius. But population is by itself not only by any means an explanatory factor for the whole story. It is in fact not really that important when compared to the 2 other drivers. The second driver of which is, well, how much does your population actually consume in terms of energy? So it is the per capita energy consumption of the population. And here we see massive variances between different countries. India, for instance, consumes relatively little, and it's kind of the same as the global south as a whole. But Europe consumes, or rather, an average person in Europe would consume 4 times as much energy as the average person in India. It's not just about the population; it's about the impact in terms of energy consumption by each member of that population. And the third point is, well, how much are your emissions for each unit of energy that is produced? Where you have more societies which are relying on clean energy sources, your net emissions impact is lower, and therefore your energy impact is also, or rather, the per capita energy consumption also doesn't become as pernicious because it is not accompanied with any major greenhouse gas emissions. So these three factors: the population level by itself, coupled with the energy consumption per capita, and the emissions intensity of every unit of energy that is produced. So that in itself explains maybe about 75% of the overall greenhouse gas emissions. And then the fourth factor is something separate, spoken about extremes of heat waves and cold spells, extremes of hurricanes and droughts and floods and forest fires. And then, so when all of these things happen, ultimately the impact is felt by populations. Now, who disproportionately bears these impacts? Now, for the rich, for the more developed, you may have the resources to kind of insulate yourself from the most damaging impacts. But if you have poorer populations that don't have the resources to do so, they get impacted the worst. You have the biggest impacts in the general population are felt by the women. And the impacts are also varying in nature. When you have water scarcity, it means that women have to travel further distances to draw water. That reduces the amount of time they have in other productive activities, so their employment goes down, opportunities for education go down. When you have soils that get impacted, it reduces the opportunity for agriculture. It means it it reduces the employment in the farming community. It means that there's greater migration to urban centers. Families get disrupted. The bulk of the responsibility for maintaining the family falls on the people who are left behind, which is principally the women, and they have to supplement the meager sources of earning with other activities. But what I simply want to alert everyone is the fact that it impacts employment opportunities, it impacts developmental opportunities, and of course, it impacts just the well-being of families, the well-being of communities, and women are obviously at the nexus of all of this development. You ignore the development of women, and it has a cascading impact on the development of communities and the development of societies as a whole.
We are one of the most populous country in the world with 144 crore people, Indian people in India. And as much as 68% of India's population actually belongs to the younger group, 15 to 64 years category, and 26% are below 24. Let's just very quickly look at the states where the population, state-wise population, if you see, we still see that Uttar Pradesh, Bihar, and Maharashtra, Bengal, Madhya Pradesh, they remain top 5 states vis-a-vis population. Now, let's also understand that population of a state should not only be seen as children being born in that state. There is a lot to do with migration also. If you see this is on the India's map, you see that there are in the color-coded about 20 crore population. Again, it is going to be Uttar Pradesh, and then below that between 10 to 20 crores is Maharashtra and Bihar. And then you see in 5 to 10 crores, you see the other states as you can recognize them. And again, this is data from statisticstimes.com. You can access it, you can see it on the net, and it gives you a lot of information on that. And why I'm making this point is that in India now we see increasing incidence of floods, earthquakes, and everything. And we see that it's not only the population particular area, but also in Uttarakhand, we know that it is a fragile ecology, and we know that it is something that there are a lot of floods. Let's not say that the population is the cause for climate change, because you have big population, so you will have more earthquakes, and you will have more earthquakes and floods and so on and so forth. Our population growth is slowly stabilizing. Our couple children rate has reached to around 2, which is less than 2.1, and that is actually below the replacement level even. If people are having fewer children, then how is it the population continues to grow? Even in the first generation the fertility starts declining, you will see that the time it reaches the population still continues to grow, because absolute number of people is going to be bigger. And therefore, when the absolute number of people comes down, then the fertility truly would have declined, and the number of people in a country would have truly gone below the replacement level. Because of this kind of population pyramid that we have, young people, and we did speak about it, it has given us a demographic dividend, because we have younger people doing good work, bringing more GDP to the country. The Kaya identity has 4 factors. So these are the factors which really make up for the greenhouse gas. And moving to then how to reduce these 4 components. Population, per capita GDP, energy intensity of output, or greenhouse gas intensity of energy, uh, emissions from a human, carbon dioxide emission from a human source. The population is going to decline very slowly, and by 2100 globally, it will come down to less than below 1760 levels of our existence, where it was around less than a billion. Do we really want the GDP to reduce? Really don't want the GDP to reduce. Look at India. Though we are the most populous country, look at us where we are. And look at where China, United States, Russia remain. They are topping the energy intensity of output. We are increasingly facing more disruption in the functioning of a community because of widespread human, material, and economic losses, which are either due to natural or man made calamities. It affects people's sexual and reproductive health. So, finally, I want to leave you with these thoughts that climate change is not necessarily an effect of population growth alone. However, it definitely impacts vulnerable and marginalized individuals and communities. People least responsible for climate change are the most affected women. Let's stop blaming people and making women's body battlegrounds to address climate change by enforcing punitive population policies and family planning programs.
We know Pacific is the hotbed of climate crisis. Could you shed some light on the impact of climate change and what it takes to deliver climate justice in such geographies?
Both SRHR and the climate crisis are issues of equity and justice, and the importance of addressing both of these through a justice lens. When we look at SRHR, those who have the least access to power and resources have the least autonomy to, the least bodily autonomy. And similarly, when it comes to the climate crisis, as Mr. Amit talked about, those who are least responsible for the crisis are bearing the brunt of the crisis. And this is very evident in the Pacific context, because Pacific communities are living within a very complex multi-hazard environment where they're experiencing multiple slow onset hazards like coastal erosion and droughts and saltwater intrusion into freshwater sources. But then that's compounded by increasing sudden onset hazards like tropical cyclones and king tides, and young people are already coming up with innovative ways to get their SRHR needs.
My answer is yes, Dr. Manisha. If not us, then who? As IPPF, as a federation, as so proudly sitting here and look at the clinics and people who are here. So if we are not going to do something about this, then who is going to do? We are at climate crisis point right now. If you look at IPPF position paper, we are highlighting that how climate crisis is affecting directly, indirectly, sexual reproductive health rights and justice. We need the feminist energy more and more, which we have it, but we need to push for change. I think nobody else can do it. Policy frameworks must address both adaptation and response to climate-induced health risks.
If we have to continue this growth trajectory, how can we achieve sustainable development that simultaneously advances the economic as well as the environmental objective?
I think if you had asked this question about, say, 20 years back, then it would definitely have been a paradox, because the only large-scale energy choices that were available to people were those that involved the burning of fossil fuels. But now we are living in a very different world. I mean, if you look at more than 2/3 of the global community of nations, 2/3 of say 195 countries, 2/3 of them have the cheapest source of energy as being either solar or wind. So there's been a humongous shift in both the technologies and the associated economics associated with renewable sources of production. Whereas now, even storage is becoming far cheaper. And so batteries are also reducing in cost, and that allows clean sources of electricity to be increasingly easily supplied to even areas where the grids aren't as well developed. We are becoming increasingly more cognizant of energy efficiency. So it's not just about consuming energy, it's also about how you can consume energy more efficiently. And so you have a lot more research being done and a lot more usage of energy efficient devices.
Where do you bring in the rights-based approach, and how do you apply the rights-based approach in this conversation?
We know which caste women and girls are going to be the most marginalized, that they will not be able to go together in a shelter home, which is made for everybody, and access to food or rations or those kind of things would be last to these. In the same village, if there are these women and girls, and if there are transgender people or people living with disabilities, they will again be, it is all intersectional. So if we really look at it from that kind of a lens, then a climate crisis induced situation makes marginalization tenfold. It's always the people on the margin who suffer the most. And yes, the most poor will not be able to afford a clean energy solution for cooking. And therefore, policies are extremely important to see that they are able to do that. But main aim has to be the empowerment of the individual, support through the opportunities which exist, and see that individuals are able to utilize those opportunities which exist for them to move forward in this journey.
How do you empower people, women? What are the keys to empowerment? If you can.
Mostly empowerment of women will come from education. That is the only thing which empowers a woman, brings her out of her home, makes her think and make a decision of herself, for herself.
How do you fund these issues, and and especially now that we are talking of getting into a niche area, an intersection of climate change and SRHR, how do we take the work further?
We need to start from prevention to detection, preparedness to response, management, and then to contribute to global health security that we all have been highlighting. We need to have approaches. One Health will give us base, and we need to build on our existing community intelligence, our networks that Dr. Manisha, you were highlighting earlier, at community, sub-national, national, regional, global level.
How do you have this meaningful engagement with the communities that can help them understand and adapt to climate change?
So one of the key things is just go into the affected communities and talking to them. What are the key ways that you currently protect yourself, and then how can we work with that?
there should be some kind of a plan in which safety, security, food security, and all of that, we should bring it a part of our awareness and engagement with young people's program. And I know that IPPF's humanitarian response mechanism has thought about it.
What are the possible adverse outcomes that a pregnant woman might encounter because of this whole climate change and climate crisis?
Though there is no direct correlation, definitely there is an indirect correlation between the climate change and the pregnancy outcome, particularly when there's excessive heat or when there's a crisis, when there's lack of nutrition. In such situations, she can be the placental circulation is affected and the baby is affected, intrauterine growth restriction can be there, preterm labor can be there, and sometimes, rarely, even an intrauterine death. Then the mother, of course, can suffer from severe anemia. So, severe anemia and intrauterine growth restriction and preterm labor. So, there is evidence that extremes of climate change can affect the mother's life as well as the baby's life.
We will not be able to achieve sustainable goals if we do not respect individual choices and rights, reproductive and sexual rights.
Climate change is an overarching reality that must contextualize the work we do today. Just to end, I would want to, quote from Yuval Noah Harari, our favorite author, I would say. He says, and I quote, "The ecological crisis cannot be solved by individual consumer choices in the rich countries or by population control in the poor countries. We need a global system that will prevent ecological collapse and that will require global cooperation and regulation." And to that, I like to add, borrowing from all of what you just said, that cooperation regulation needs to be grounded in human rights. We need to think critically, creatively, and in collaboration to be sustainable.